start it up. All right. Let's turn it down a little bit. All right. Welcome to the Junkyard. Right? Welcome to the Junkyard. I am Combo Junkie, and this is another episode of Coding with Combo, where we use some of the most modern software on the market today to build something cool. Okay. And what are we building? So we are in the process of building ourselves a news gaming website. Okay, and we're going to be using Sanity.io as our content management system. We're going to be using Vercel as our code deployment, and we're going to be using NextJS and ReactJS as our front-end framework. So let's just recap what the project is, right? We're going to be building something like the IGN website, where we have this concept of stories, Okay, stories can be tagged with different tags, like Deadpool and Wolverine. If you click one of those tags, you go to a section front dedicated to stories created for that tag, right? So for this Deadpool and Wolverine tag, the only content that shows up when I click that is the Deadpool and Wolverine content. If we go back to the story, it can introduce you to our second content type, which is the person content type, right? So same like the tags, right? If I click on the person, I should get presented with a section that is all the stories that this person wrote, right? One of the authors of those stories. So all of these are Jesse Shadeen. Either he wrote it himself or they contributed to it in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to be doing something like that. And then the last content type that we are going to create is our story, right? So the story is what houses all of that content. You can see here we have the tags at the top, then a title, a subtitle there, some content, some story elements as we like to call them, kind of stream down the page. So this is what we're going to be working on. And in our last session, we figured out something that I thought was going to take a lot longer, to be honest. We figured out the infinite scroll technique in React and NextJS, which is a really cool feature that we can add to our website. Let's head over here to the IDE and let's actually fire up. Let's do this. I want to save this script. I'm going to actually save this script real quick. That needs to go in a document of some sort. Save it in my social media scripts. And now what I'll do is I'll save it. Okay, and this will be my, I'm working on a video later, so I always like to script them out, but this is going to be our infinite. All right, so there is that. I'm gonna bookmark. Let's put it in. All right. Coming back over to the IDE, I want to start our app. It looks like our app is already running, so I'm actually gonna kill that. Start up a fresh terminal here. Fire up the app. And then let's talk about this infinite scroll feature, right? Let's talk about what we pulled off last week and what we're going to be doing again today, right? So infinite scroll, we talked about pagination, how sites like to break large sets of content up into more consumable chunks for their users. Infinite scroll is a flavor of pagination where instead of you receiving like a pagination bar at the bottom where you click through 1, 2, 3, 4, or the previous and next arrows. Actually, let me show you the Envato site. It's a really good example of pagination, old school pagination, right? Web 1.0 pagination. So back in the day, you know, this was the most common form of pagination where you have this toolbar here. Get this nifty. You have this toolbar at the bottom of the page that says, do you want to go to page 2, page 3? Or you can just go to the next page, right? So if I click next, you can see new pieces of content get added to the screen here. And what we're going to do is infinite scroll though. So it's the same concept where you can page through large sets of content. However, we don't want to force our users to have to interact with some little pagination bar down here, right? We don't want them to do that. Instead, we want to keep feeding them content as long as they continue to scroll. So if they haven't found what they're looking for and they reach the bottom of the page, if you notice, like right now, my page never ends, right? I can just literally keep scrolling, and every time I get to the bottom, I get to this kind of area where there are these two loading graphics, but then immediately more content is injected into that pane, right? So I'm able to just continuously feed my user content as long as I have content available and as long as they keep scrolling. So we need to complete that work, right? We now have to apply that to our section front. So if we head over here to this Acer Delorum section, we can see here that this is a lot of content, right? And you can scroll through it. Don't get me wrong, it's okay. But the more content we add, the harder it is going to be to scroll through this section as well, right? So let's count this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 pieces of content on this one page, right? That's not a good experience. I mean, 21 isn't bad, but what I really want to say is like maybe only the first 4 or 5 pieces of content show up, and then load in 5 pieces of content as the user scrolls down. Or maybe we do even less, right? Maybe we say show 3 pieces of content by default, since these images are kind of big, and then as you get to the 3rd piece of content, load in more. So if we head over to our Jira board, we can kind of see that's where we left off, where we have a task. This is our client saying, hey, I want you to add infinite scrolling to the home page and to the section pages, right? So we've already seen it working on the home page. So now what we're going to dive right into today is we are going to add that same logic to our section pages. I think we already have a branch to work with. I'm going to head over to GitHub and just copy that branch name. Okay, this should be based on the latest main branch, but we'll do a git pull just in case. Now let's head back over to the IDE and we can actually get started this project. So I'm gonna kill the app, and then I am going to actually increase that a little bit because that is really small. All right, that looks better. Okay, and now we'll just do a git fetch just to make sure we have the latest branches in our local, and then I'll do a git checkout of that branch. Okay, so we have the latest branch here. I'll do a git pull. It looks like we may be out of date. We have divergent branches, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to do a git pull origin main. Let's see if that works. And I'll do no rebase. No rebase. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a git checkout main. And then I'm going to do a git branch delete against that branch name, because I think this is the 2nd branch name we've started like this. And then now I'm going to do a git checkout of that same branch. Okay. All right, and then now I do a git pull, and this should be the latest branch. Okay, now it's up to date, right? So we have the latest code now. We can go ahead and minimize this a bit, and we can really just dive right in, right? So I'm going to head over to my, let's see, where do we want to start? So the first thing we should do is add our loading graphic to this template, right? So if we come back over to the browser, let's just use our app now. We can close these other tabs for now. If we come back to the browser, if we did want to mimic this look and feel, right, we would need a loading graphic that kind of looks like this. It has this square over here to the left. Oh, and when I say loading graphic, let me just show you guys what I mean by that. So let's look at skeleton, shadcn skeleton. Let's see what that looks like. So this is what these loading graphics normally look like, right? You have this kind of circle here that represents an image, and then some lines that represent some text, and then eventually when your actual content loads in, it replaces that with real content. So if another example would be this card here, right, where we have this square image here, and then we have some text lines there, right? So we want to set it up so that it looks a lot like our landscape view. So let's actually do that first, right? We already have the shadcn skeleton library, right? So if we go into components, UI, there's a skeletons TSX, and we can see that we've already created a skeleton card. We're going to actually create a skeleton landscape card as well. So I'm going to go back to shadcn in the browser here. I'll go ahead and copy that and now head back to the IDE. And we already have this skeletons card here. So I am going to paste in, this is the same graphic that they had, but this is going to be our skeleton landscape card. Okay, so this is the same thing as the card, but it just should look a little different. So now we'll import this into our story bank and start tinkering with it, right? Because we eventually want to wire everything up, but for now we just want to make sure that we have a skeleton on the page that looks right? So I am going to import this first. So I'll import skeleton landscape card from close, right? So it's going to be from @/components /y/skeletons plural. Okay, and then I'm going to actually add this to the template now. So we'll say it needs to be wrapped in the same thing that this is wrapped in. And then these little sub items need to be wrapped in the same thing as well, right? So let's start with our component. Let's just add the skeleton card, and then let's go grab the outer container for each individual row, which is this guy. And then now we can, okay, so now our card is wrapped in the same container that the other stuff is wrapped in, but we have some more work to do, right? Because outside of that card being wrapped, this left image also needs to be wrapped, right? Let's see, what did I do for this? It looks like I just have the image there, which is fine. So the whole thing is wrapped in another div, this outermost div here. And it doesn't look like, oh, it does look like I have some classes on these other things as well, so we'll do that too. So the first thing I want to do is just create our outermost container here. If we come back to the bottom of the page, we have one more container here that we need to add, which is this guy. Okay, and then inside of here is where our skeleton landscape card goes. So, and we only need one of these, so a lot of this is going to go inside the skeleton landscape card itself. We'll do that at the end. We have all the pieces. So the first thing we need is our image needs a call span 1. So I'm going to go back over to skeletons. This is the first image right here, and it just needs call span 1. So I'll do call span 1. All right, and then now, yeah, that's right. And then now it looks like the, I don't know if that, yeah, that doesn't need a container of any kind, but it does look like these need some classes, right? The next container, which is housing the text and stuff. So I am going to add that here, right? And this should be pretty close already. Let's go ahead and save that and see what it looks like. Let's go back to the browser and let's look at our app and see what that looks like. It's all the way at the bottom. Oh wait, we shut the app down, didn't we? All right, let's go back to the IDE and fire up the app. All right, we'll open that up, and then let's just see what that looks like. I'm actually gonna go back to the IDE again, and I'm gonna edit our query so that the story bank doesn't pull so many items, right? I'm gonna say for the story bank, only pull in one item, okay, or 2 items rather. So there will be a little bit of scrolling, but it's not going to be too much scrolling that we have to do. So let's go over to this Cena section. And now we can see we have 2 items here, but then we have this little, like, really hard to kind of see even, this little container here. One piece of it is our image, and the other piece is our text. But things are broken up a little differently for us, so we need to fix that. So it looks like the outer 2 containers are fine. The next thing we need to address, though, are these inner containers, right? We have some stuff going on here that is kind of making it look a little weird. So what I'm going to do is... does that look strange? Yeah, I'm just going to take the HTML, the surrounding HTML, and put it inside the DOM so I can actually manipulate the structure myself. So they already have an outer container. We'll just replace their outer container with our own markup. Okay, and then they also have an inner container, which will also just supply our own markup. All right, and then now, where'd that come from? All right, and then there we go. Well, I'll leave that in place. All right, and then that might do it, or we might be missing. That might. All right, so let's see what that looks like on the front end. All right, it's getting better. It's getting a lot better. So we have the separation of items here. Now we need to make sure that the width and height of this div actually looks like it should. So, all right, so let's go do that. Let's go grab the width and the height of this image and make this image match that. And then we'll also make the width of these lines of text match as well. So let's go back to the IDE. Go find what our width is of this image, which is 430, and the height is 247. We are going to Alright, so we're going to make the width here 430, and then this was 247. Alright, so now we have that. We also need to adjust these widths, I think. Just so that they stretch across the full width of the page. Let's go back to our application and see how we're doing. It looks like we're good on the image, right? The image looks good, but this text leaves a lot to be desired, right? So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna make the height of one of these a little deeper if we need to, but let's just give that a shot. Let's see what that looks like. So I wonder if it makes it look as though the like what if it makes it look as though the text is bigger? I don't know if that's the case. So it does, right? That works just fine. So what we'll do is go back to the IDE. We're gonna do 4 at the top and then 8 underneath. So it's actually gonna be this. We're gonna say that since the, yeah, let's plan this out. So our first row is gonna be pretty short, right? That's just our tag. So we'll leave that at the width that it is now. That width here looks fine. And then our title text is gonna be longer. So we'll go out a bit more. And we'll just use numbers for this too. Instead of using pixel widths, we'll just use the 4, 8, whatever units they allow us to use. And then for the real text here, we can actually say that that would be the same height as the, yeah, it's about the same height as your this tag text. All right, so let's go do that. So the first thing we have is the changing of this to like 4, for example. Let me see what that looks like. 8. So 100 is 100%, I guess. Let me see what 50 is. I'm guessing that these are percentages when you don't add the PX next to it. About 48. And my internet is being really weird right now. I can't even get YouTube. Just like frozen it. No. I think I just need to restart the stream. Want to learn WebGL. I wish. What's up, Sam? How you doing, Sam? Welcome back. Welcome back. I am having internet troubles right now. For some reason, it looks like the stream is kind of lagging. I'm trying to figure out what the problem is, but I'm not entirely sure what's working there. If it's going too slow, let me know, and I'll just restart the thing. So yeah, so what we'll do is we'll say that I think what we have here is kind of okay, right? If we go look at the browser, I think if we wanted to say that this top one was so here, let me change it back to what it was, right? Because we probably can get away with this. If we wanted to say that top bar was the tag, that's too deep, right? So we'd probably have to go down about 100 pixels. But we can probably say that top bar is the tag, the second bar is the title, and then create a bunch of additional bars underneath at 100 width, right? And say that that's the body copy. We can just do like a few more of those, and we don't even need to do the thumbnail for the image, like the person's image. Okay, all right, thanks, Sin. Sin says it's not lagging that bad, so all right, I'll just keep it going. So I think this is a good enough loading graphic. This kind of does feel like this piece of content at a glance. And remember, users aren't going to see it for very long, right? They'll see it for a few seconds and then the new content will load in. So we'll say that that suffices for our loading graphic. So the next thing we need to do, now that we have a loading graphic in place, the next thing we need to do is connect it to some kind of event listener, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that actually what I want to do is I want to take out this outer div. Like one of these outer divs, I want to remove it. So I am going to take this top div out. And let's actually wrap the component with this div, this wrapper div, just so it's not like on an island by itself, right? Okay, so what I was going to say though is the next thing we want to do is we want to tie our loading graphic to some kind of event listener, right? Normally back in the day when you're using JavaScript, you would tie this to a scroll event using, you know, event scrolling logic in native JavaScript. You just bind those events to the event scroller, to the events handler, the scroll handler. But in React, especially in NextJS, you have to do things a little differently. There's a really helpful module, a package, I guess you would call it in the NPM space. There's a really helpful package that React gives you called the React Intersection Observer. And what that does is it allows you to say, I want you to do run some code whenever a certain thing is in the viewport, right? Is in the browser's viewport. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to set it up so that whenever our skeleton landscape card is in the viewport, let's just console log hello world for now, right? So we'll just make sure that we have some interaction from the user's browser, right? So I'm going to go ahead and import. It's called use in view is what it's called. Yep, and exactly like that, right? So we're going to use single quotes. I don't know why they insist that I use double quotes. I'm actually going to start using double quotes because that's what they give me out of the box, and I've kind of been swimming against the grain here. So I'm going to switch all of my single quote desires to double quotes there. All right, so now that we have that in place, this use in view, we can actually start using it right now. But we can set up a const. Yep, exactly this, right? And then the next thing we need is we need use effect. That's a React feature, use effect. It allows you to do things based on events that happen in the user's browser. So client-side events, right? So I'm going to do a use effect call here, which it just requires an anonymous function, and it requires a Boolean listener, right? So I'm going to say run some logic whenever this is true, right? So I'm going to say if in view, right? So this is at all times listening to the user's scroll activity. I'm going to just say console.log it's in view. Oh, geez. It's in view. All right. And that's all we'll do for now, right? We'll say that whenever the user scrolls to our DOM, we get a console.log. Now, the way you connect this to our DOM is you supply it the reference of this in view call, right? So I'm going to say here, this is why I wanted that DOM to live outside of that component, right? Because here I want to say that the reference is this reference ID here. So now what's going to happen is this is going to tell in view that whenever this is in the user's viewport, it needs to fire off the logic in this function, right? So every time I scroll, use effect will fire off, but only when in view is true will it do this console.log. So let's go take a look at that. We'll head back over to the browser, and then we'll notice we get this error, right? This is a really important React error. It's talking about how I'm trying to use effect in a client component, right? So what we're dealing with right now is this concept of server components versus client components. Okay, it's a really important concept in React. It took me a while to wrap my head around it, but when you dig into it under the hood, it actually makes perfect sense. So a client component in React is basically any component that manipulates state in some way. Okay, so it may receive data from your server, but not directly, right? It is responsible for handling state events in the user's local client, right, their browser. And then on the other hand, you have server components, which their main job is to interact with the server, right? The computer at some data center somewhere that houses your website's data, your database, etc. Okay, the server component interacts with the data and then it sends it back to make it available to the client, so to the browser or to any client component. So in this case, because we're trying to capture the user scroll events, we are interested in making this a client component, right? So let's actually do that. We'll update this to use the use client call. Okay, and now if I save that, the website should work just fine. And as we can see, that error went away and this is working. So now we want to test that whenever that loading graphic is in the viewport, we should see our console log out that it's in view, right? So there we go, right? It's in view. If we go back to the top and we clear this out, we scroll down again, it's in view. Okay, if we scroll up and scroll down again, we can see it fires a second time, right? So we are now essentially, we are interacting with this user's scroll history, like scroll event, based on some certain like element on the page being present. So whenever this thing is in my viewport, it's going to fire some logic. And that's kind of half the battle, right? So now we have that capability in place. That's perfect. The next thing we need to do is we need to update our query so that it's compatible with Sanity's pagination. And there's a really specific way that Sanity recommends that we do that. So first, let's just go look at the query and see what's happening, right? We're saying for the story bank query that I want all the stories that have a slug defined that are in a published state, that's basically what this line says, and that have that at least one of their tags matches the current tag that I'm on, right? So if we go back to the browser, basically this is saying give me all the stories that have at least one of their tags is Cena, right? I don't want anything except the things that have been tagged with Cena. Okay, and that's what we're getting back, right? These are Cena's not the only thing that it's tagged with, but it's going to be one of the things tagged with Cena. Okay, so what we want to do to that query is we want to just add a little pocket in here that says, and also while you're doing all that, I want to make sure that the only content you give me back is some kind of paginated result. I don't always want every single thing. I want maybe the only 3 things back, right? And when you think about pagination, if you're on page 1 and you have a total of 3 items per page, well, page 1 should just be items 1, 2, and 3. But then when you get to page 2, it should be items 4, 5, and 6. And when you get to page 3, 7, 8, 9, and so on and so forth. Well, Sanity has a very unique way of handling pagination. What I was just describing, by the way, is called array slicing. It's like a really age-old technique used for slicing up content, used for slicing up big data sets and delivering packages back as content. But if we check out Sanity's documentation, they actually vote against using the array slicing technique. They say it's less efficient because in Grokland, since we're dealing with a huge database, a huge data lake, whenever you do this kind of search, in order for Sanity to give you back, let's say you have 1,000 pieces of content in your system. In order for them to give you back items 100 through 200, they have to first get back all 1,000 items. And only then do they slice out the first 100 to the 200th item, right? So you're getting tagged for the full query. So they say instead of doing that, you use a filtering approach. An approach that says, based on what you're ordering your data by, I'm gonna give you wherever you left off, and then until the size, right, the end. So if you say you want items 0 through 100, but you say you want your query to start at item number 4, right, then it's gonna give you item 4 through 100, even though you asked for 0 through 100. So it's a really cool technique, and they have a very specific way to do it. So we're gonna be using the last published at, right? So it's actually last updated at. This may be dated documentation, but it's actually last updated at for us. And we're gonna be using that to determine what our pagination results are. And in cases where the date is exactly the same, they have a tiebreaker functionality that's really nifty. They say if we ever run into a case where the last published at date is the same for, like, let's say my last piece of content, then I'm gonna compare against the ID in that scenario. Okay, so at that point I'm gonna say start at my last ID that had this last published date. Okay, so let's actually wire that up. It looks like when we were in our IDE here, it looks like tab 9, yeah, tab 9 is doing this for us, which is fantastic. I love this thing. But they did the bulk of the work for us. We are just getting 2 items back here right now. So essentially what this is saying in the IDE, this is saying now that we will include updated at, underscore updated at, what this is saying is like, I want to get all of the stories that have a slug that are in a published state for this specific tag, and where the updated at timestamp is greater than whatever I sent you for the last updated at timestamp. Okay, so if it was page 1 and I didn't send you any last updated at, it wouldn't give you anything. But you can imagine if it's page 2 and beyond, we're going to store the last updated at variable and we're going to send that back instead. So now, for example, this last day updated at, let's say that on item number 2, the last updated at was, February 12th. Okay, so now the next time it looks in our data set, it's going to start at February 12th. And when it gets to February 12th, it's going to check for the last ID in February 12th. Because that was the last thing we looked for, right? That was the last piece of content we told it to come back. So that's Sanity's way of paginating. It's a really clever way to make sure you're not blowing up your database with really robust array slice queries, right? These queries are a lot cleaner. All right, so I'm going to come back here. And now what we need to do, now that we've updated this query, we need to respect this query in our main page.tsx file, right, for the section. So we'll go section/slug/page.tsx, and here we owe it some more parameters, right? So for the story bank, we know now that there are 2 additional parameters that we are passing. So there's ID, and then there is last ID. So I'm actually going to say last story ID here because I'm going to say last story ID here because we technically don't have but we technically already have an ID variable being used, and I want this to be a little clearer than that, right? So I'm going to say for last ID, it's going to be last story ID, so that it's not confused with last tag ID. Okay, so now we'll come back here, last story ID, and then this is the last story updated at. Okay, so we'll update that as well. So instead of last updated at, it'll be last story updated at. Okay, so as long as the updated at time is, yep, all right, that looks good. So let's head back over to the browser and let's just make sure that that is rendering as we would expect, right? So I'm going to head back over to the browser, come to our app, and we just want to make sure that when we view this page, we still see our 2 results. But we can't stop there, right? We need to do one more layer of validation. We need to make sure that if we were to pass in the last, so this is our last item right here, this Tutamen Stata Bardis item, right? Now, if I pass in the values here, if I pass in the last story ID and the last story updated at from this Tutamen Stata Bardis item, I need to make sure that I'll get 2 new pieces of content, the next 2 pieces of content in the list, right? So I need to confirm that. And the way to confirm that is first, we're going to spit out those values, right? I don't know what my last updated at value is. So what I'm going to do is in the IDE, I am going to say, I'm going to do a console.log here. And it's going to do a log of stories. And then in here, I'm going to do stories.length to find my array index. And then I'll say underscore ID here. Okay, so it's actually going to be stories.data. So stories.data is what I reference it by. So now this is saying in the stories.data array, I want the very last index, and I want the ID of that index. And also I want the updated at for that as well. So now when I save that, we should see that pop up, right? So we get this 36 character GU ID, and then we get the actual timestamp. So I am going to save that, we'll copy that. And I'm just gonna plug that here, and then we'll check on the browser to make sure we're getting different content. So before I even hit save, I'm gonna go back to the browser so we can confirm that we see this content right now, right? There is a forest picture and then the Bardas story with the blue crystals. But the moment I hit save here, now we should see two, yep, and now we see the next two stories, right? If I were to go do that exercise one more time, right? Because now we have new GU IDs. Where is it? There it is. Where'd it go? All right. Now that we have new GU IDs, I can go update the timestamp and the GU ID. If I hit save on that now and go back to the browser, we should see even newer content, right? So, whoops, sorry about that. All right, and now we see two brand new pieces of content. So we know that's wired up correctly. So now we can get rid of that. We can just set this back to, let's go back to the IDE. We can set this back to, that wasn't it, browser. We can set that back to empty strings. And then here, we'll be using that in a different context. So I do want to make one more change, right? I want to change stories here to initial stories, because really that's what we'll be dealing with. These are going to be our initial stories. And now we'll have to go update the story bank to respect that as well. So let's clean this up a bit. All right, this is going to actually be initial story. All right. All right, initial stories. So now the last piece is that we need to update that guy, right? So now initial stories is what should be surfacing. If we head back over to the IDE, it looks like we now need to update this guy, right? This needs to be initial stories.data. Let's go back to the, well, sorry, I meant browser. This is the error we're seeing. We need to update that to initial stories.data. So let's go back to the IDE and do that. Okay. So that looks good. Yep, that looks good. So now let's head back to the browser, just make sure we're seeing our experience. And we are, right? These are now back to the first two stories too, which is good. So let's go back to the IDE. And the next thing we want to do is we basically want to tie these two things together now. So we have the ability right now to say whenever something scrolls into view, do some certain logic, right? Fire off some logic. And then we also have the ability to say, whenever I want, I can ask Sanity for a paginated set of results as long as I have my last story ID and my last story update. So the first thing we want to do is on our story bank, we want to actually provide those state variables. Okay, so we're going to come back to use effect here, and we're also going to do use state because we have some state management now that we want to implement. So I'm going to do yep, this is the first one for the stories. And then I'm going to do last up, yep, this is the next one. Looks like they are way ahead of us on this. And then the last one is ID, right? So last ID or last story ID, that's fine. Set last story ID. Okay, and I'm actually gonna stick with that. I'm gonna stick with that verbiage, right? Where we always do last story updated at and last story ID. Okay, so that looks good. Now we should have some state variables to play with, and that should be something we can pass around and update and store, etc. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a new function that is capable of passing these state variables to our query, right, and giving us back new stories. So let's do that right now. We'll call this, it'll be an async function. Async function called, I'll call it fetch new stories. Okay, it doesn't need any parameters to be passed to it because these are going to be globally available for us. They're constants at an outer level, so we should have access to them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a new constant called new stories. And that's going to be an array of center. Yep, here we go, right here. This is almost it, right? This is almost it. But we can't do this here because this is a client component that we're in. We can't do server-side requests. So we're going to have to do our own function. I'm going to call this fetch stories by tag. Okay. And then I think I actually need the tag, don't I? Yeah, I'm going to need the tag now. So we're also going to pass the tag in here. And the tag, if I'm not mistaken, is just, we only need the ID for that. So we'll say initial stories and tag ID. Or wait, maybe I can get tag ID back in here. I wonder if I can get tag ID back in here. Nah, I can't get the actual tag ID. That's okay. That's okay. What I'll do is I'll just pass that along, right? So it'll be tag ID is equal to, and then actually we're using that twice now, so const. I don't want to set that up by itself. Let's just pull it. That's not that. Okay, so now this is giving us the tag ID, and here we'll just also accept the tag ID, right? So okay, and now that we're getting a tag ID, we need to actually tell it what we expect here, and this is just going to be a string. It's going to be the tag ID that comes down. So now in here, what we're saying we need is a tag ID. We need the last ID, the last story ID, and then we need the last story updated at, right? And that will be the method signature for the method we're going to create. So let's go create that. We have a fetch method now. We can actually just copy this guy for the most part. And the only thing missing here, right, so is the tag ID. Tag ID, which is straight. And now we have almost everything we need. Basically, we need to mimic what we have on the initial stories call here. So we're going to do exactly this, really. Pull this in. This is the exact query we need, to be honest. So we'll do it here. I don't think we do that. Okay, and instead of initial stories, we'll just do stories. All right, this gives us back stories. And then for ID, this is just going to be tag ID. Okay, and I'm actually going to update that here as well. I'm going to go back to our query and just say, instead of ID, we actually are asking for a tag ID. That's going to make it a little easier for us to pass these variables around. So let's do that here as well. Let's do tag ID. And then everywhere else, though, tag ID will just be passable. So here we can just do tag ID. We don't need to do the... And here we can do that. And then here we can do that. So let's actually... Alright, so now that that's working, we need to bring in the story bank query. Let's actually bring that in as well. Alright, what's wrong? So this will be fetch stories by tag. Okay, last story updated at. Have a signature. Alright, and that should do it. That should do it for at least that side of the fence. Now we need to import this fetch stories by tag method. So let's do that. Import fetch stories by tag from, yep, that looks good. All right, now that should go away. Okay, so now that we have our new stories coming in, the next thing we need to do is say, we need to be able to say, like, if there are no stories, or sorry, if there were stories, I need you to set all of my states. Right, so I need to do, yep, set last story updated at and set last story ID. And I need to do set stories, right? Which is exactly this, right? It's basically just combine my new stories array with my old stories array. That's fine. And now we can do our else clause, which is we need to set a marker for when we've reached the end of the list, and that's what that's going to look like, right? So now what we want to do is we want to say, instead of it doing a log when you scroll to that interview, like call this method instead, right? So I'm going to do that. All right, and there we go. So now if we head back to the website, we should actually see infinite scroll. Maybe. there is, oh, I think the last thing we need to do is we need to change initial stories to stories. Alright, so now if we head back to the browser, we should see infinite scroll working, and there it is. Now we are infinitely scrolling this page till we get to the end of the content. Okay, but now there's one more hiccup. When I get to the end of the content, I don't want to keep seeing, like, I don't want to keep seeing this, right? This should go away. This should like automatically vanish. So to do that, we can use a little ES6, right? It's a really simple chunk of ES6. We can just say, hey, only show the below content if something else is true, right? So if we come here, we can actually pull this into this conditional. And we can say if the last story ID is not equal to end, then I want you to show that. Otherwise, don't show anything. Assume I'm at the end and don't show anything, right? So if we come back here, let's put that. All right, if we come back here and refresh and scroll down, we'll scroll until there's no more content. But once we get to the end this time, we're not going to keep seeing loading graphics, right? It's literally just going to be the last piece of content and we're done. And this should work on any page that we go to, right? Doesn't need to be that page. I don't like 2 items per page though. I'm going to go increase that to show more items on scroll so it's not so jumpy. So let's go back to our query. And instead of doing items 0 through 1, we'll do items like 0 through 4, right? That's 5 items per page. So now let's head back to the browser. Let's go to the top of the page first, refresh it, and then we'll scroll down. Okay. There we go, right? So we have all the content there now. Perfect. All right, so we are officially done with pagination. I am going to do a little bit of code cleanup, or I'm going to check to see if I have any code cleanup that I need to do. I don't think I do. That looks good. That looks good. Okay. Yep, I think we're good. I think we're ready to commit this code and move on. Yep, that was really easy. So yeah, that's the meat and potatoes of pagination slash infinite scroll. Conquered in less than a week. Actually conquered in 4 hours, to be fair. All right, so let's go through this. So the first thing we did was we increased number of items being created as part of the content generator. And for page.tsx, we added, so the overall thing here is we added infinite scroll capabilities to the section pages. Converted story bank to a client component. Added new service, the fetch server component. Gonna put that in there. Added new landscape, skeleton, loading graph. All right. I already talked about that, and then we improved added pagination capabilities to the tag-based story query. All right, so that's everything we did. I think that looks good. Let's go ahead and commit this code. So let's do a git branch just to see where you are. Yep, git commit -m prndjnkee 43 adds, let's just say completes infinite scroll implementation for section pages. section pages. All right, and then we'll git push that. And then now we can head over to Bitbucket and handle our code merging. So we'll go over to Bitbucket. I say Gitbucket, I mean GitHub. They're one and the same, but head over to the code section, and now we have this new push that came in. So we'll go and grab our notes. Okay, we'll make this look a little user based. All right, that looks good. Let's just review these changes to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. So we have the create data method. Looks good. So we got rid of we commented this out because we're going to be creating a lot of dummy content over the next couple days, so we can really play around with the infinite scroll. So we're going to have thousands of pieces of content in the system. We're going to stop deleting them as we run the batch creation methods. So that looks good. Coming here to the page.tsx for the section front. Yep, this is our enhancement to allow for pagination. Yep, this running this to the client component using a lot of state here to that nice and clean. We have our skeleton, that looks good. Finally, we updated the fetch and the query. Yep, that looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and submit this PR. From the PR, I'll go ahead and merge it into the main branch, and we are good to go. All right, I'm gonna hold off on deleting that. I think I'm gonna leave branches around for a couple days just in case I need to ever go back to them. But right, so what we were gonna do is we were gonna say, well, we'll make our own image primitive, right? And it'll come out of the box equipped with an alt and a caption field. And then we later learned that we needed a title field. So we were like, it'll come equipped with all of that. And going forward, if you add media, you can separate out your media title from your image title, or your media title from your video title. I don't think we want to do that anymore. Okay, I think we want to flatten this out quite a bit, actually, so that all of these fields are directly tied to the content they represent. And in cases where that's not true, or where that's not enough, like if for whatever reason there's a story that wants to reuse a piece of imagery or a video, then we'll make a document type to support that, right? We'll make a new video document type that can house videos and be referenced.